Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the GC Show. I hope y'all are doing absolutely amazing here on this Monday afternoon. And as you guys might know, we've been going through a four-part series when it comes to the four big parts to answering the call. This week, we are in the final part of that four-part series, and we are talking about having a willing response. And when God calls you to do something and alerts you of your next move, are you going to answer the call? So without further ado, let's dive right into it. So the big question for this week's episode is, what does it mean to have a willing response? Now, the simple answer to that question is to open your heart and mind to what God's trying to tell you, surrendering your own plans and aligning your plans with His plans that He has for you, and doing the thing that God is calling you to do with eagerness and perseverance, not putting it off, but doing the thing that God's calling you to do. And no matter what you may have to go through to be able to do what God's calling you to do, you do it anyway. You know, that's the simple answer, but we're going to be diving a little bit deeper. And you know, the reason why when it comes to the four big parts of being called, why I put it into its own series and why I'm calling it a four-part series is because you can't have three parts without the other one, or one part without the other three. You have to be able to have all four to be able to answer the call and do the will of God in your life. You see, for example, if you have a personal relationship with God, you understand that you have a life of purpose, you know your specific assignment, but then you don't have a willing response, then you're not answering the call that God has on your life. Or it could be the other way around, where you have one and not the other three. You might not have a personal relationship with God. You might not know that you have a life of purpose. You might not know your specific assignment, but if you have a willing response, how are you ever going to know what God is trying to tell you to do? You can take any sort of combination of the four, but if you do not have all four of the big parts when it comes to being called, how are you ever going to know what God is trying to tell you to do? So that's why I broke it down into a four-part series, and that's why it's so important to have all four of those big parts. And if you have not gone back and watched the other three parts, I would encourage you to do that so that you can know the four big parts when it comes to being called. And this week we are diving into the final part, having a willing response. So our passage this week comes from Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 and 32. It's the parable of the mustard seed. And it says, "Here is another illustration Jesus used. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed planted in a field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but it becomes the largest of garden plants. It grows into a tree, and birds come and make nests in its branches." So now, what does this passage, the parable of the mustard seed, have to do with having a willing response? You see, the mustard seed is the smallest of all seeds, and that thing that God might be telling you to do might seem so small in your mind, but just like that mustard seed growing into an immense tree, you have no idea where God could take that thing that He put into your mind. And that's the big thing, we get these ideas and we think, it's just kind of no big deal. But that idea that you have in your mind could literally change generations. You have no idea where God could take that thing. And if you have not answered the call, you know that thing that God might be telling you to do, but you have not answered the call. The goal is by the end of this episode that you would feel motivated to get up off the bench, get into the game, and answer the call that God has on your life. That's the goal. So we got a couple of big points in this episode. And this first point is actually one of my favorite quotes, man. It's that God doesn't call the equipped, instead He equips the called. For this, we got to flip to Mark chapter 1. Hold on, I got a bookmark in here. There it is. And it is, when Jesus was making His first disciples, whenever He was calling out for Simon, Peter, and Andrew. Mark chapter 1, verses 17 and 18. It says, "Jesus called out to them, 'Come, follow me. I will show you how to fish for people.' And they left their nets at once and followed Him." Now, something I think we can take away from Mark chapter 1 with Simon, Peter, and Andrew is that at the end of verse 18, it doesn't say that they hesitated or they went home and thought about it and they questioned Jesus, saying, "Jesus, are you really trustworthy?" But it said they dropped their nets and followed Him at once. And I think that's sometimes where many of us go wrong is we make up these scenarios in our head that keep us from actually doing the thing, and we build a barricade for ourselves when really following and answering the call that Jesus has on your life is right in front of you. We put the barricades there for ourselves when really there's no need for a barricade to be there. You see, we need to have that sense of urgency too. It says they left at once. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but you never know when your last opportunity is going to be. I'm actually going to leave that for later because that's the whole point later on in the episode, so stay tuned for that. With that, right, it's not necessarily that we have an unwillingness, that we don't want to do the will that God has in our life, but, it's the feeling of being unworthy and maybe not trusting fully in God. It truly takes a lot to put faith into God and take steps to answer your call. But you see, as humans, we want to see the 5-year plan, right? We want that vision 2026. We want to know what's coming next. But God doesn't give us that 5-year plan. He wants to see if we have faith and trust in Him even when we can't see what's next. You see, following after God is more like a stone path than a vision 2026, right? God's going to wait for you to step onto the first stone for Him to put down the second stone. And then once you step onto the second stone, He puts down the third stone, and so on. Because God is trying to see, even when this guy can't see the future, even when this guy doesn't know what's coming, is he going to have enough faith in me to be able to trust in me and know that whatever is coming next is going to be good and for him? And the truth is, God's plans will never fail, and He will always put down those stones next exactly where they need to be. And the reason why God doesn't show us that plan all the way and fully give us that vision 2026 is because He wants us to see if we'll really trust in Him, even when we can't see what is next. Now, like I said, feeling unworthy, I think it's a big problem, man, is we feel unworthy or unqualified to do kingdom work. And this single thought, I guarantee you, has taken so many amazing ideas to the grave. And why do I say that is because people might have these amazing ideas, but then they think, I can't do that thing. Or Satan gets in your mind and says, look what you've done in the past. There's no way you could do that thing. There's no way you're worthy to do that. Look at what you've done. You wretched sinner. There's no way you could do that. So then people take these ideas that could be so amazing, that could be life-changing for people, and they take it to the grave with them. Because if an idea is never put on paper or is never told to anyone, if that idea just stays internal, whenever you die, that idea goes away. And think about if that idea that God put in your mind could change generations. You see, the big thing when it comes to kingdom work, the work that we do as followers of Christ, it's not the work of our own hands. It's not our work, but it's Christ working through us to point others back to Him. And, all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But because it's not our own hands doing the work, doing the kingdom work and the will of God, but it's Christ working through us, that's what makes us qualified to be able to do kingdom work in this world. So I don't want you to ever think that you're not qualified to be able to do what God is calling you to do, because it's not by your own doing that, God is working. He's working through you to point others back to Him. That's what qualifies us ultimately. And, I'm not big on comparison. I don't like using comparison as examples, but, if you ever think that you're unqualified, just remember that Paul, who became the greatest missionary of all time, was once a Christian terrorist. And, God used Paul's passion for killing Christians to go the opposite direction, do a 180, and use that passion to share the good news of the gospel with people. He used something that was so bad in Paul's life, turned it around, gave his own spin on it, and used it for His glory. So, if you think what I've done in the past, there's no way I could ever do the kingdom work that God has, for my life. I could never do that. Look what I've done. Just know that God can use anything, and He can most definitely use anyone. Welcome into halftime, the new segment here on the GC show. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, be sure to let me know down below, because I love hearing feedback, man. I love hearing suggestions that you guys have when it comes to the GC show. And I also like hearing questions too, because with questions about Christianity, of course, I'm going to do my best I can to answer those questions and hopefully point you toward Christ, because the goal of the GC show is to bring them all to heaven. So if you have a question, be sure to reach out. As always, if you know of any friends or family members who may need to hear or want to hear this lesson or any of the other ones, I'd encourage you to share it with them, because like I said, the goal of the GC show is to bring them all to heaven, point even just one more person toward Christ. As always, if you have any prayer requests, something weighing heavy on your heart, something you're going through, be sure to let me know, whether that's leaving it down below or messaging me through Instagram, or if you know me personally, you can message me personally, or you can reach out to anyone that would be willing to pray for you, because the power of prayer is so strong. Now, a little bit sad news. We will not be having a GC short this week. I warned you guys a couple weeks ago. I'm very busy right now. And don't have the opportunity to record GC shorts right now, but those will hopefully be coming back soon. But there will be no GC short this week. But to lift the mood a little bit, we got Live and Lifted next week, session 3 coming at you, which is crazy that session 3 is already here, because that means we're almost 12 weeks in to season 2. I mean, it's crazy, man. Time is flying by. But that'll be fun next week. I'll take the link to the Zoom and make sure to put that out as many places as possible so it's easy to access. And I'll probably also be live streaming on Instagram as well. So, you don't necessarily have to join the Zoom if you use Instagram, but I'll make sure to put that link out for those of you guys who do want to join the Zoom and join the Live and Lifted. But that is a wrap for this week's halftime. Let's take it back to the second half. As we jump back into the second half, the next big point in this episode, right? Delayed obedience is often disobedience in disguise. I'll say that again. Delayed obedience is often disobedience in disguise. What I mean by that is that procrastination is a sin. You see, I know very well I struggle with that. I know many of us struggle with that, procrastination. As it says in James 4:17, I don't know exactly what it says. It's something along the lines of, if you know what you ought to do, but then don't do it, it's a sin. Procrastination is a sin, because whenever you delay your obedience, whenever you procrastinate with that thing that God is calling you to do, you're basically looking God in the eyes and telling them, oh, don't worry, I've got this. I'll get this done whenever I feel more comfortable, whenever, I feel like I got more time on my hands. Like, God, don't worry. Don't worry, I got this. It's no big deal. But then what happens is a day goes by, a week goes by, a month goes by, a year goes by, and it never happens. Delayed obedience is often just disobedience in disguise. And the big reason why this is such a problem is, if God can't trust you to follow through, He's not going to give you more work to do in the future. Think about it this way, that if you go and tell your friend, you say, hey bro, keep this between me and you, and then you tell him a secret, and then he goes out and tells everyone that secret, you're not going to be super happy with that friend, are you? And you're not going to be able to trust him with information that you have in the future. It's the same thing with God, right? If He tells you to do something, but then you're putting it off, you're procrastinating, how is God going to be able to trust you to do more work for His kingdom later in the future? And now there's another side to that too. Another example is like when a boss tells you to do a job, like if he comes up to you and say, hey man, can you go take out the trash? And then you do take out the trash. In the future, your boss, whenever he has another small task that he needs, he's going to be able to trust you with it. And it's the same thing with God, right? If He can trust you in the little things, in the little tasks that He asks of you, He's going to be able to trust you with the bigger things as well. And whenever He has another mission, He's not going to have to worry about you not getting it done, because He trusts in you. He knows that you're going to be able to follow through. So the big thing with procrastination is, right, that it's important to have a heart posture of Christ, your will be done, over one that resists or procrastinates or negotiates. That is the big point. It's so important. Now, another big point for this week's episode is that following God's call often means stepping into the unknown or leaving comfort. So here's a little personal testimony here. You're not going to believe this about me, but I've never liked the spotlight or public speaking at all. I've always liked being comfortable just kind of sitting off to the side. I've never been the life of the party or, the one that's always seeking attention or the class clown. Even in like friend groups, I've never been like the main character. I'm almost just kind of like there, And, I've always been that guy that, if you're walking in a group of 3 on the sidewalk, I'm the one that's walking in the grass. And what I mean by that is, whenever you're in a group of 3, you can put 2 people on the sidewalk and then one person has to walk on the grass just on the width of the sidewalk. But, when I was like growing up and when I was younger and stuff, like I've never thought there was really anything special about me. I always just look at myself and I'm just like, I'm just an average person just like everybody else. And, for me, starting the GC show was something that was very uncomfortable because I've never liked attention. I've never liked putting myself out there and, putting myself in a vulnerable position. And everyone in life, right, has like this platform sitting next to them, and some people step onto it, some people don't. And when you step onto that platform, all of a sudden, like you're in the arena and other people around you can see it, and like people can throw darts at you or people can cheer you on. And like that's a place where I never thought I'd be, a place where I've never been comfortable in my mind being, but that's where God called me to be, was in the arena, step out of the comfort zone and, share these lessons that are for the benefit of others. And, stepping out, getting into the game, right? I've never been, in my mind, I've never been anyone that's special by any means, anyone that stands out. So for me, knowing that, I've been able to get into the game, I'm not just standing on the edge, but I've jumped into the cold lake. I've done the uncomfortable thing. Now that I'm in here kind of swimming around, that I've done the uncomfortable thing, that I'm here, I look at people over on the side that haven't jumped in yet. And it's not a judgmental thing saying like, oh, like, look at me, I'm in here, they haven't done it yet, like, shame on them. But it's more of like, I look at myself and I've kind of like looked down on myself, I guess, in a way, but I've like raised people up above myself because I see so much potential in other people that, whenever I see like me, I've jumped into the lake and I see people that are standing on the edge waiting to jump in, I'm like, man, I know if I can do it, I know you can too, And, I just think there's so many people that a willing response can take them so much farther than they could ever imagine. I know a willing response could take you so much farther than you could ever imagine. And you never know where God could take that thing. And, once you step out of the comfort zone, once you jump into that cold lake and you're swimming around and you're like starting to get comfortable in the uncomfortable zone, right? You're going to have one regret with that. And it's going to be that you didn't start sooner, Yeah, I mean, it's going to be uncomfortable. And, even with where I'm at, if you ask me what's the most uncomfortable or what's the hardest episode to record, I'd tell you it's the next one. But at the same time, if you ask me what's your favorite episode, Gavin, I would tell you the next one is my favorite episode. Even though I've been doing this for almost a year now, like it's still uncomfortable for me to sit down and record these episodes. But I know that my uncomfort is nowhere close to as important as sharing news that could change someone's life and could impact them for the better. And once I reach that mindset that I'm not here to perform, that I'm here to serve more, if anything, it's helped me to be so much more free and do these lessons knowing that I'm doing it for the glory of God and the benefit of other people. So, just kind of a little personal testimony there, but I know if I can do it, I know you very well can too. So the question is, are you going to answer the call? So, like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I'm very sports-minded. Whenever I get a chance to throw in a sports analogy, I'm going to. And how I picture Kingdom work is like it's a big basketball game, and the whole world is there watching. The whole world's packed out this arena, standing room tickets are sold and everything. And the game is Team Jesus versus Team World. and it's in Team World's arena. And, this stadium's packed out. Team World, fans are all there, right? And the reason why I say basketball is because John the Baptist is on Team Jesus, and he's out there baptizing people. And what I mean by that is if you don't know that term, which probably most of you don't, saying you're baptizing someone in basketball is just another way to say you're throwing down a dunk on their head. So that's why I think basketball. I think of this because John the Baptist, John the Baptizer, he's on Team Jesus. And the cool thing about this game, right, Team Jesus versus Team World, is that you can have more than 5 players in the game for Team Jesus. You going into the game, you getting into the game doesn't mean someone else has to get subbed out, but as many people as you want can get into the game for Team Jesus. Now you might say, well, who are the coaches? Jesus is the coach of Team Jesus because he's calling out the plays. He's telling the people on the court, the people in the game, what to do for his kingdom. Now you might say, if Jesus is the coach of Team Jesus, does that make Satan the coach of Team World? And the answer is actually no. Satan's not the coach of Team World, but instead he's sitting behind Team Jesus' bench, and he's just chirping away, right? He's a heckler, and he's trying to do everything he can to get everyone around him to heckle Team Jesus and keep them from doing the work on the court, keep them from playing their best game. Sound familiar when Satan gets into your mind? And you see, on Team Jesus, there's 4 different types of players, and I believe just about, or most, if not all, Christians fall into at least one of these 4 categories. The first player is the prospect or the rookie. This is the person who's brand new to Christianity, hasn't heard about it in the past, wants to know more, and, wants to know what it means to be a Christian and follow after Christ. And when Coach Jesus calls you up and he's drafting you onto your team, are you going to answer the call? The second player on Team Jesus he's not really on Team Jesus, he's more the free agent. Right? He's the guy who's been on Team Jesus, he's been on Team World, he's just kind of a floater, right? This is the guy who's in church on Sunday, but then the rest of the week's kind of just doing whatever he wants. And when Jesus calls you back to play full-time for Team Jesus, are you going to answer the call? The third player is the bench warmer. This is the guy who's on Team Jesus, but now he's at a point where he's like, Coach, I want to get into the game. Whatever you want me to do on the court, I will do it. And when Coach Jesus gives you a play call, even if it doesn't make sense, it's the willingness to still do what God is telling you to do. So when Coach Jesus gives you a play call as the bench warmer, he says you can get into the game, but you have to do this play call, even if it doesn't make sense. Are you going to answer the call? And the fourth type of player is the guy who's on the court, who's in the game, knocking down threes from the corner. But when Coach Jesus calls out a different play call and says, maybe instead of shooting threes, drive in for a change or set a screen, are you going to answer the call? This is the person who's been doing kingdom work, who has been in the game walking faithfully with the Lord. Now, the goal is to evolve from one to the next over time. Maybe you're the guy right now who's the free agent. Maybe you're the guy who's kind of in between, Christ and the world. The goal is that you would become, more involved in Team Jesus and eventually become a man that is on the court, living faithfully and doing kingdom work for the kingdom of God. Because, ultimately, if you're on Team Jesus, Satan is losing. If you are doing work for the kingdom of God, Satan is losing. Now, with these 4 types of players, a big question arises, right? Whether you're brand new to the Christian faith, don't even know who Jesus is, but wants to know more about Christianity, or you're someone who has been walking faithfully with the Lord for decades on end, or you're anyone in between, the big question still remains the same. When God hits up your line and alerts you of your next move, of your next play call, are you going to answer the call? And that is the lesson for today. When God hits up your line, are you going to answer the call? And this doesn't just have to refer to, big-time kingdom work. This is just all about taking the next move, the next step, taking the next step on that path that God is calling you to. So, that's a wrap for this little 4-part series. Not the wrap for season 2, though. We got Live and Lifted next week, so stay tuned for that. And obviously, we got more episodes in the future. But for now, thank you guys for listening. I'll see you guys next week. Be great today, and praise God.